The spring of 1876 brought more than wildflowers to the harsh Wyoming Territory. It delivered Katherine O'Sullivan bound in chains to Redemption Springs, a town whose promise of salvation existed only in its misleading name. The auction block beneath her feet swayed as Katherine struggled to maintain her balance, her wrists raw from the rope that bound them together, her copper hair falling in tangles around her dirt-streaked face. Baxter Ryder watched from the shadow of the general store porch, the brim of his hat pulled low over eyes that hadn't known peace since the war. He'd come to town for supplies, not to witness the selling of human flesh, a practice he thought had ended with the war 11 years prior. Yet here stood a woman, her green eyes flashing defiance even as tears tracked clean lines down her dust-coated cheeks. $500 for the Irish troublemaker, shouted Silas Wilkes, the town's self-appointed slave trader. Guarantee she'll work off her passage debt and then some. Strong back, stronger will just needs breaking in. The crowd of men laughed, a rough sound that scraped against Katherine's ears like the desert sand that had worked its way into her boots during the long journey west. She'd left Ireland with dreams of opportunity, only to find herself indentured to a family who worked her nearly to death before selling her contract to Wilkes when she dared to complain of the conditions. $5.50. Called out a rancher whose bloated face suggested too many nights with a whiskey bottle. $600, countered a mine owner with hands like leather and eyes that promised cruelty. Katherine squared her shoulders, refusing to cower though her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd survived the crossing, the betrayal, the beatings. She would survive this too somehow. $700. The new bid came from a voice as smooth as honey and sharp as a razor, belonging to Thaddeus Blackwell, owner of the Crimson Ace Saloon and the most feared man in 3 counties. His smile didn't reach his coal-black eyes as he assessed Katherine like a prized mare. Baxter's jaw tightened beneath his beard. He'd crossed paths with Blackwell before, once in a card game that nearly ended in bloodshed. And again when he'd intervened, as Blackwell's men roughed up a young cowhand who couldn't pay his gambling debts. The stories about how Blackwell treated women who worked in his establishment were enough to make a hardened man's blood run cold. $750, called the mine owner, clearly reluctant. $800, Blackwell countered swiftly, his voice carrying a finality that silenced the crowd. He adjusted his silk vest and stepped forward, already reaching for his wallet. Something snapped inside Baxter. Maybe it was the memory of his mother working her fingers to the bone after his father died. Or perhaps it was the ghost of his sister Emily, lost to typhoid on the Oregon Trail when they were children. Or maybe it was simply the pure, undiluted defiance in the woman's emerald eyes, refusing to be broken even as she was being sold like cattle. Without conscious thought, Baxter strode forward through the crowd, which parted before his 6'3" frame like water around stone. He reached up, yanked his worn leather hat from his head and slammed it into the dirt at Wilkes' feet. "She's not for sale," Baxter declared, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. Wilkes' watery eyes narrowed. "Now see here, Ryder," I said, "she's not for sale," Baxter repeated, one hand resting casually on the Colt revolver at his hip. "Not to Blackwell. Not to anyone." Katherine's eyes widened as she took in the tall stranger standing in her defense. His dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and a beard shadowed his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught and held her blue as a summer sky and burning with a conviction that made her breath catch. "The woman has a debt to pay," Wilkes sputtered, his jowls quivering. "Her contract, how much?" Baxter demanded. "What, the debt? How much?" Wilkes licked his lips. $1,000, murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was an outrageous sum, clearly inflated. "You're a liar, Wilkes," Baxter said calmly. "But I've got $800 in my saddlebags. You'll take that and consider the debt paid in full." "Now wait just a minute," Blackwell interjected, stepping forward with a dangerous smile. "I believe I was in the middle of a transaction." "You were in the middle of buying a human being," Baxter replied, not bothering to look at the saloon owner. "Which isn't legal anymore, in case you missed the news from Appomattox." Blackwell's hand twitched toward his pistol. Indenture contracts are perfectly legal, Ryder. And I suggest you mind your own business before you find yourself in a pine box. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the tension that crackled between the two men. Katherine held her breath, afraid to hope yet unable to quell the wild beating of her heart. $800, Baxter repeated to Wilkes, ignoring Blackwell entirely. And we'll call it square. Wilkes glanced nervously between Blackwell and Baxter, clearly calculating his odds. Blackwell was dangerous, but Baxter Ryder had a reputation as one of the fastest guns in the territory. Finally, greed won out. Fine. 800 and she's free and clear, no, Blackwell snarled, his composure finally cracking. I offered 800 first. The girl comes with me. Actually, Baxter said, finally turning to face Blackwell, you offered 800 for her labor. I'm offering 800 to cancel the debt entirely. Different transaction. Before Blackwell could respond, Baxter strode to his horse, extracted a leather pouch from his saddlebag, and returned to count out the money into Wilkes' eager palm. The slave trader hurriedly scribbled a receipt declaring Katherine's debt paid in full, then shoved it, and a folded document, presumably her original indenture contract, into Baxter's hand before backing away. Only then did Baxter approach Katherine, who stood frozen on the auction block, unable to believe what had just transpired. With gentle hands, he untied the ropes binding her wrists, his touch careful around the raw, red skin. You're free, miss, he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. No strings attached. Katherine searched his face for deception, but found only compassion and something else, a simmering anger that she instinctively knew wasn't directed at her. Why? She whispered. No one deserves to be owned, he replied simply. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at being denied their entertainment but wary of lingering with Blackwell still standing nearby, his face twisted with fury. This isn't over, Ryder, Blackwell called out. Not by a long shot. Baxter didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he offered his hand to Katherine, helping her down from the block. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from days of inadequate food and water. What now? She asked, her Irish lilt more pronounced with her exhaustion. Now, Baxter said, retrieving his hat from the dirt and dusting it off, we get you some food, some clean clothes, and a safe place to rest. After that, it's up to you. The world's wide open, miss. O'Sullivan, she supplied. Katherine O'Sullivan. Baxter Ryder, he returned with a slight nod. My ranch is about a half-day's ride from here. I can offer you shelter until you decide your next move. Katherine hesitated. Going alone with a strange man, even one who had just spent a fortune to free her, was a risk. Yet staying in Redemption Springs with Blackwell's vengeful glare following her was perhaps more dangerous. Why should I trust you? She asked bluntly. A ghost of a smile touched Baxter's lips. You probably shouldn't, Miss O'Sullivan. But I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm under my protection. Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Very well, Mr. Ryder, I accept your offer. As they walked toward Baxter's horse, Katherine became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her once fine traveling dress torn and filthy, her hair a tangled mess, her face streaked with dirt and tears. I must look a fright, she murmured, embarrassed. You look like someone who survived hell, Baxter replied matter-of-factly. No shame in that. Before mounting up, Baxter stopped at the general store and purchased supplies: a clean dress, undergarments, soap, and food, which he packed into his saddlebags without comment. Katherine watched in bewilderment as he continued to spend money on her behalf without hesitation. He helped her onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, before swinging up behind her. Katherine stiffened at the proximity, but Baxter maintained a respectful distance as much as possible given their shared saddle. What about Blackwell? Katherine asked as they rode past the Crimson Ace, where the saloon owner stood watching, his eyes promising retribution. Blackwell's a problem for another day, Baxter said. Right now, let's just get you somewhere safe. As they left Redemption Springs behind, Katherine felt something unfurling inside her chest, a fragile, tentative feeling she eventually recognized as hope. For the first time since leaving Ireland, she dared to believe that perhaps her American dream wasn't dead after all. The journey to Baxter's ranch passed mostly in silence. Katherine, exhausted beyond words, found herself dozing against his solid chest despite her best intentions to remain alert. Baxter said nothing, simply adjusting his hold to ensure she didn't slip from the saddle. When they crested a small rise late in the afternoon, Baxter gently roused her. "We're here." Katherine blinked awake to see a modest but well-maintained ranch spread out before them. A two-story log house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. A creek wound through the property, its banks lush with spring growth. "Welcome to Ryder's Rest," Baxter said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's beautiful," Katherine murmured, genuinely impressed. After weeks of seeing nothing but dusty trails and crowded, filthy camps, the peaceful ranch seemed like paradise. As they approached, a middle-aged woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her weathered face broke into a smile at the sight of Baxter. "About time you got back," she called. "Was beginning to think you'd decided to take up permanent residence in town." Her smile faltered when she spotted Katherine. "And who might this be, Mrs. Hollister? This is Miss Katherine O'Sullivan," Baxter said as he dismounted and helped Katherine down. "She'll be our guest for a while. Miss O'Sullivan, this is Martha Hollister, my housekeeper and the finest cook in Wyoming Territory." Martha's shrewd eyes took in Katherine's bedraggled appearance and the rope burns on her wrists. Her expression softened immediately. "You poor dear. Let's get you inside and sort it out." Katherine found herself whisked into the house and installed in a comfortable bedroom with a copper tub that Martha promptly filled with steaming water. Clean clothes the dress Baxter had purchased in town were laid out on the bed, along with a hairbrush and toiletries. "Take your time, dear," Martha said kindly. "Dinner won't be ready for a while yet." Left alone, Katherine sank into the hot bath with a moan of pure pleasure. The past months of hardship seemed to melt away with the dirt and grime. By the time she'd washed her hair and dressed in the simple but well-made calico dress, she felt almost human again. When she ventured downstairs, she found Baxter and Martha in the kitchen, engaged in quiet conversation that stopped abruptly at her appearance. Baxter stood, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the transformation. "Miss O'Sullivan," he said, clearing his throat, "you look recovered." "Thank you," she replied, smoothing the skirt of her dress self-consciously, "and thank you for the clothes and your hospitality." Martha bustled about, setting a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie on the table. "Eat up now," she urged. "You're nothing but skin and bones." As they ate, Katherine found herself sharing her story how her parents had died in the potato famine when she was a child, how she'd been raised by an aunt who passed away last year, how she'd used her small inheritance to book passage to America in search of a better life. "The advertisement said they needed governesses and ladies' companions," she explained. "But when I arrived in Boston, the agency said the position had been filled. They offered me a different opportunity, a family in Colorado Territory needing help with their children." Her voice grew bitter. "What they didn't mention was that I'd be charged an exorbitant fee for my passage west, room and board. By the time I realized I'd been tricked into indentured servitude, it was too late." "And how did you end up in Wilkes' hands?" Baxter asked quietly. Katherine's cheeks flushed with anger at the memory. The family's eldest son became inappropriate in his attentions. When I defended myself, they accused me of theft and sold my contract to Wilkes to teach me humility. She looked down at her plate. "He decided I'd fetch a better price in a mining town where women are scarce." Martha made a sound of distress. "Merciful heavens. Well, you're safe now, dear." "For how long?" Katherine asked, looking directly at Baxter. "I appreciate your rescue, Mr. Ryder, truly I do. But I have no money, no prospects, and apparently an enemy in Mr. Blackwell. What am I to do?" Baxter considered her for a long moment. "You can stay here while you figure that out," he finally said. "No rush, no pressure, and as for Blackwell," his jaw tightened, "I can handle him." "But why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Katherine persisted. "You've already spent a fortune on my behalf." A shadow crossed Baxter's face. Let's just say I have personal reasons for disliking the buying and selling of people, Miss O'Sullivan. Leave it at that for now." That night, lying in the most comfortable bed she'd encountered since leaving Ireland, Katherine tried to make sense of her situation. Baxter Ryder was an enigma, gruff yet gentle, clearly capable of violence yet protective rather than threatening. She wondered about the demons she'd glimpsed behind his calm exterior, the personal reasons he'd alluded to. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the events of the day, the humiliation of standing on the auction block, the terror of seeing Blackwell's cold eyes assess her value, and the shock of Baxter's intervention. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Baxter throwing down his hat, his voice ringing out, "She's not for sale." In the days that followed, Katherine slowly regained her strength. Martha took her under her wing, showing her around the ranch and enlisting her help with household tasks that Katherine eagerly embraced, grateful to be useful. Baxter maintained a respectful distance, busy with the day-to-day work of running the ranch alongside his small crew of cowboys. Katherine often watched him from the porch or kitchen window as he worked with the horses, his movements confident and graceful despite his size. A week after her arrival, Katherine was hanging laundry in the yard when Baxter approached, leading a dappled gray mare. "Thought you might like to meet Starlight," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She's gentle but spirited, seemed like a good match for you." Katherine moved forward cautiously, extending her hand for the mare to sniff. "She's beautiful. She's yours if you want her." Katherine's head snapped up. "What?" Baxter shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "You'll need a way to get around if you're staying here. Can't expect you to walk everywhere." "Mr. Ryder, Baxter," he corrected. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Baxter," she amended, "I can't possibly accept such a gift. You've already done too much. It's not charity if that's what you're worried about." He hesitated, then continued, "I could use some help around here. Martha's not getting any younger, and with spring roundup coming, we'll have extra hands to feed. If you're willing to work as my housekeeper and cook's assistant, I'll consider the horse part of your wages." Katherine studied him suspiciously. "Is that the truth, or are you just trying to preserve my pride?" A slow smile spread across Baxter's face, transforming his usually solemn features. "Maybe a little of both." Despite herself, Katherine smiled back. "Then I accept on one condition. Name it. You teach me to ride properly." "I've only ever ridden side saddle, and not very well at that." Baxter's eyebrows rose. "You want to learn to ride astride, in trousers." Katherine lifted her chin. "This is the frontier, isn't it? Practical considerations should outweigh propriety." Baxter's laugh, deep and genuine, took her by surprise. "Miss O'Sullivan, Katherine, you continue to surprise me. Yes, I'll teach you to ride. We'll start tomorrow." True to his word, the next morning found them in the corral, with Katherine wearing a pair of boys' trousers that Martha had altered to fit her slim frame. She felt scandalously improper, but determinedly pushed aside her misgivings as Baxter showed her how to saddle Starlight and mount properly. "Keep your heels down," he instructed, walking beside her as she guided the mare around the corral. "That's it. You're a natural." Katherine flushed with pleasure at the praise. "It feels so different from side saddle, more secure somehow." "That's because you're actually controlling the horse, not just perching on top of it," Baxter replied. "Now, let's try a trot." By the end of the lesson, Katherine was sore but exhilarated. As Baxter helped her dismount, his hands firm at her waist, she found herself unexpectedly aware of his closeness, the clean scent of his soap, the strength in his calloused hands, the intensity in his blue eyes as they met hers. For a heartbeat longer than necessary, he held her, their faces mere inches apart. Then he abruptly stepped back, clearing his throat. "You did well today," he said gruffly. "We'll continue tomorrow." As April turned to May, Katherine settled into a routine at Ryder's Rest. Mornings were spent helping Martha with household chores and learning to cook frontier style. Afternoons usually included a riding lesson with Baxter, which quickly became the highlight of her day. Under his patient instruction, she grew confident in the saddle, progressing from the corral to short rides along the creek to longer excursions exploring the ranch property. Baxter proved to be an unexpectedly good teacher, demanding but encouraging, pushing her to improve while ensuring her safety. On a particularly beautiful afternoon in mid-May, they rode to a high meadow bursting with wildflowers. Dismounting to let the horses graze, they sat on a fallen log, enjoying the spectacular view of the distant mountains. "I never imagined America would look like this," Katherine admitted, gazing at the landscape. "It's so vast and untamed." "That's what I love about it," Baxter replied. "There's room out here to breathe, to be who you are without anyone looking over your shoulder." "Is that why you came west?" she asked, turning to study his profile. Baxter was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "Partly. After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east." "You fought in the war?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Union cavalry." 4 years that felt like 40. His hand unconsciously moved to his left side, where Katherine knew from Martha's whispered confidences that he carried a Confederate bullet too close to his heart to be safely removed. "What did you do before the war?" A sad smile touched his lips. "I was studying law at Harvard when Fort Sumter was fired upon. Thought I was going to change the world with legal briefs and impassioned speeches." He shook his head. "Instead, I learned how to kill men efficiently and lead other men to their deaths." Katherine hesitated, then gently touched his arm. "I'm sorry." Baxter covered her hand with his own. "Don't be. The war needed fighting. Slavery needed ending." His expression darkened. "Which is why seeing Wilkes trying to sell you made me so damn angry. Some battles you think are won, only to discover they're still being fought in different ways." Something clicked into place for Katherine. "That's your personal reason for helping me, isn't it? Because it reminded you of the war." "Partly," he acknowledged. "But also because my mother was an indentured servant when she first came to America from Ireland. She worked 7 years to pay off her passage, 7 years of backbreaking labor and mistreatment." His jaw tightened. "She used to tell me stories about it that would make your blood run cold." "Your mother was Irish?" Katherine asked in surprise. Baxter nodded. "Bridget Flanagan from County Cork. She met my father after she earned her freedom. He was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania." Katherine smiled. "So you're half Irish. That explains your stubborn streak." This startled a laugh out of Baxter. "Takes one to know one, Miss O'Sullivan." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, an understanding that transcended words. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Baxter raised his hand to brush a strand of copper hair from her cheek. "Katherine," he murmured, her name a question and a plea. Heart hammering, Katherine leaned into his touch. "Yes," she whispered. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing urgency as she responded. Katherine had been kissed before awkward, fumbling attempts by boys back in Ireland, but nothing had prepared her for the flood of sensation that Baxter's kiss unleashed. His beard was soft against her skin, his mouth warm and insistent, his large hand cradling her face as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Baxter rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you stand tall on that auction block, fire in your eyes despite everything they'd done to you." Katherine laughed softly. "Even with dirt on my face and my hair in tangles, especially then," he said seriously. "Beauty's easy to find out here. Courage is rarer." Before she could respond, the distant sound of galloping hooves broke the moment. Baxter was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun as a rider crested the hill. It was Caleb Jenkins, one of the ranch hands, his horse lathered and blowing hard. "Boss, thank God I found you." "We got trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Baxter demanded. "Blackwell's men. 6 of 'em rode onto the property about an hour ago, said they're looking for the Irish girl and won't leave till they get her." Jenkins cast an apologetic glance at Katherine. "Mrs. Hollister sent me to warn you. The rest of the boys are keeping an eye on them, but they're drinking and getting rowdy." Baxter's expression hardened. "Get back to the house, Caleb. Tell the men to stay alert but not to provoke a fight. We'll be right behind you." As Jenkins rode off, Baxter turned to Katherine, his face grim. "I was afraid something like this might happen. Blackwell doesn't take kindly to being crossed." Fear clutched at Katherine's heart. "This is my fault." "No," Baxter cut her off firmly. This is Blackwell's doing, not yours, and I'll be damned if I let him or his thugs harm a hair on your head." He reached for her hand. "I need to know you trust me, Katherine. Things might get ugly." Katherine laced her fingers through his. "I trust you, Baxter." His eyes softened momentarily before his practical nature reasserted itself. "Let's get back then, stay close to me." They rode hard, taking a circuitous route back to the ranch house that allowed them to approach from behind the barn, out of sight of Blackwell's men, who had set up an impromptu camp near the front gate. Martha met them at the kitchen door, her normally calm face tight with worry. "Thank the Lord you're back. Those ruffians are demanding whiskey now and they're getting belligerent." "How many men do we have here?" Baxter asked, helping Katherine dismount. "4 besides yourself," Martha replied. "Caleb, Wilson, Miguel, and young Jimmy." Baxter nodded. "Even numbers, then." "Not ideal, but we've faced worse odds." He turned to Katherine. "I want you to stay inside with Martha. Keep away from the windows." "Baxter, please, Katherine. I can't focus on handling Blackwell if I'm worried about you." The earnestness in his eyes silenced her protests. "Be careful," she said instead, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." As Katherine watched anxiously from the kitchen window, Baxter strode toward the gate, his men fanning out behind him. Even from a distance, she could see the authority in his bearing, the quiet confidence that commanded respect. The leader of Blackwell's men, a burly fellow with a pockmarked face, stepped forward, swaying slightly. "Well, look who finally showed up. We've been waiting on your hospitality, Ryder." "You're trespassing, Delaney," Baxter replied, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "State your business and then get off my land." Delaney spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "You know why we're here. Blackwell wants the Irish girl, says you stole what was rightfully his." "Miss O'Sullivan is under my protection. She's not going anywhere." "That ain't your decision to make," Delaney growled. "Blackwell paid good money. Blackwell was trying to buy a human being." Baxter cut him off. "That doesn't fly anymore, not even out here." One of Delaney's companions, a reedy man with a scar across his throat, laughed unpleasantly. "Blackwell says to tell you he's willing to pay double what you spent. $2,000 for the girl, no questions asked." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. $2,000 was a fortune enough to buy a substantial property or start a thriving business. "Not interested," Baxter replied without hesitation. "Then maybe we'll just take her," Delaney said, his hand dropping to his gun. In one fluid motion, Baxter and his men drew their weapons. "I wouldn't advise that," Baxter said quietly. "You might take a few of us down, but none of you will ride away from here alive." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Delaney slowly raised his hands. "Easy now, no need for bloodshed today," he smirked. "Blackwell thought you might be difficult. That's why he's got another plan in motion." "What plan?" Baxter demanded. Delaney's grin widened. "While we've been keeping you occupied here, Sheriff Haynes is in town swearing out a warrant for the girl's arrest. Theft of property, assault on her previous employers, all kinds of nasty charges. By this time tomorrow, she'll be in a cell, and there won't be a damn thing you can do about it legally." Katherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The accusations were false, but who would believe an immigrant woman over established citizens outside? Baxter's expression remained impassive. "Sheriff Haynes is an honest man. He'll want evidence before he acts on those charges." "Evidence can be arranged," Delaney said with a shrug. "Blackwell's got friends in high places. You're fighting a losing battle, Ryder. We'll see about that. Now get off my property." "Gladly." "Our job was just to deliver the message." Delaney swung back into his saddle. "Enjoy your last night with the Irish whore. Tomorrow she belongs to Blackwell." Only Caleb's quick reflexes prevented Baxter from drawing his gun as Delaney's parting insult hung in the air. "Not worth it, boss," the cowhand murmured. "They're leaving." True enough, Blackwell's men were already riding away, their laughter drifting back on the evening breeze. Inside the house, Katherine sank onto a kitchen chair, trembling. "They'll really arrest me." "Not if I can help it," Baxter said grimly, striding through the door with his men close behind. "Caleb, ride into town and find out what's really happening with these supposed charges. Wilson, take the first watch. I want eyes on the property boundaries at all times." As the men dispersed to their assigned tasks, Baxter knelt beside Katherine's chair. "I won't let them take you," he promised, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I swear it. But if there's a warrant, then we'll fight it legally. I told you I studied law, remember? I know enough to keep you out of jail while we sort this out." Martha bustled about, putting a kettle on the stove. "What you both need is a hot cup of tea and some food. Can't think straight on an empty stomach." Despite the circumstances, Katherine felt a surge of affection for the practical housekeeper. "Martha's right. We need clear heads to figure this out." Over a simple meal of ham, beans, and cornbread, they discussed options. Caleb returned midway through with troubling news. Blackwell had indeed convinced Sheriff Haynes to issue a warrant, based on a sworn statement from Katherine's previous employers claiming she had stolen jewelry and attacked their son before fleeing. "The sheriff's not happy about it," Caleb reported. "Says the timing seems mighty convenient, but he's bound by the law to serve the warrant. He'll be out here first thing tomorrow." Baxter's jaw tightened. "Then we need to be ready with a counter-strategy." He turned to Katherine. "Did you ever sign anything during your time with that family? Any documents at all?" Katherine thought back. "Only my indenture contract when I first arrived. They kept it locked in the father's desk." "And Wilkes had that contract when he brought you to auction," Baxter said slowly. "Which means I now have it." He rose abruptly. "I need to check something." He disappeared into his study, returning moments later with the folded document Wilkes had handed over. "I thought so," he said triumphantly, spreading the paper on the table. "Look here, the terms of your indenture included a binding arbitration clause. Any disputes were to be settled by a neutral third party, not through criminal proceedings." "What does that mean?" Katherine asked. "It means the family violated their own contract by filing criminal charges." "And look at the date," he pointed to a line near the bottom. "Your term of service was set at 3 years from the date of signing, which was August 15, 1875. "I was only with them for 7 months, Katherine murmured. "Exactly. Which means when they sold your contract to Wilkes, they had no right to do so. You still owed them service, but they couldn't transfer the contract without your consent." Baxter's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who had found a legal loophole. "This whole transaction was invalid from the start," Katherine dared to hope. "So what do we do when the sheriff arrives? We show him this document and explain that you're filing a counter-complaint for unlawful transfer of indenture and false imprisonment." Baxter squeezed her hand. "It's enough to muddy the waters legally and buy us time to build a stronger case." That night, after Martha had gone to bed and the ranch was quiet except for the distant sounds of the men on watch, Katherine found Baxter on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. "You should be resting," he said without turning as she joined him. "I couldn't sleep." Katherine wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Too much on my mind," Baxter nodded in understanding. "We'll get through this, Katherine, I promise." "Why?" The question had been building inside her for weeks. "Why go to such lengths for me? The truth, Baxter." He was silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the darkness. "Because from the moment I saw you on that auction block, something inside me recognized something in you. A kindred spirit, maybe." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I'm just a man who's been alone too long, who looked at you and saw everything he never knew he wanted." Katherine's heart stuttered in her chest. "And what is it you want, Baxter Ryder?" "You," he said simply. "Just you, Katherine O'Sullivan, your courage, your spirit, your smile, the way you refuse to be broken by circumstances that would shatter most people." He took a step closer. "I want to build something with you. Something real and lasting." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "Even with all this trouble I've brought to your door, especially because of that." He smiled wryly. "Any fool can fall for a pretty face in peacetime. It's when the bullets are flying that you learn what a person's really made of." Katherine moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I'm falling in love with you, Baxter Ryder," she confessed. "God help me, I think I started falling that day you threw down your hat and said I wasn't for sale." His arms tightened around her. "Then we're both fools," he murmured against her hair. "Beautiful, hopeful fools." Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, filled with the knowledge that tomorrow might bring separation. Katherine clung to him, memorizing the feel of his strong back beneath her hands, the taste of his mouth, the scent of his skin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Baxter rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you inside before I forget I'm supposed to be a gentleman." Katherine smiled, feeling bold and reckless. "What if I don't want you to be a gentleman right now?" Baxter groaned, closing his eyes briefly. "Katherine, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," she replied, placing a hand on his cheek. "I've lost so much, Baxter, my parents, my home, my country. Tomorrow I might lose my freedom. Tonight I want something that's mine to choose, mine to give." For a long moment, Baxter searched her face. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him of her sincerity, for he nodded once, then took her hand and led her inside, up the stairs to his bedroom. What followed was a night of tender discoveries and passionate declarations, whispered promises and reverent touches. For Katherine, who had known so much hardship, Baxter's gentleness was a revelation. For Baxter, who had seen so much death, Katherine's life-affirming passion was redemption. Dawn found them tangled together, reluctant to face the day but determined to meet it head-on. "Whatever happens," Baxter said, stroking her hair, "remember that I love you. I will move heaven and earth to protect you." Katherine pressed a kiss to his chest, right above his heart. "And I love you, no matter what comes next." They dressed in silence, each lost in thought. As they descended the stairs, Martha took one look at their linked hands and nodded in satisfaction, as if a long-expected event had finally come to pass. Sheriff Haynes arrived mid-morning, his weathered face solemn beneath his hat. He dismounted slowly, leaving his deputy waiting by the gate. "Morning, Baxter," he said, nodding to the rancher who stood waiting on the porch. "Miss O'Sullivan, Sheriff," Baxter replied evenly. "I understand you have business here today," Haynes sighed. "You understand correctly. I've got a warrant for Miss O'Sullivan's arrest." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Theft and assault charges from a family in Denver. Before you execute that warrant, Sheriff, I think you should see this." Baxter handed over the indenture contract. Miss O'Sullivan was illegally held and transferred against the terms of her own contract. "We're prepared to file counter charges." Haynes scanned the document, his frown deepening. "This complicates matters." "Furthermore," Baxter continued, "I have reason to believe these charges were fabricated by Thaddeus Blackwell as retaliation after I prevented him from purchasing Miss O'Sullivan at an illegal auction conducted by Silas Wilkes." "Illegal auction," Haynes's head snapped up. "In my jurisdiction." "Last month in Redemption Springs, Wilkes was selling Miss O'Sullivan to cover a supposed debt, in clear violation of laws against human trafficking." The sheriff's expression darkened. "I've had my suspicions about Wilkes for some time." He tucked the warrant back into his pocket. "I think this matter requires further investigation before any arrests are made." Hope flared in Katherine's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm not taking you in today, Miss O'Sullivan," Haynes said kindly. "But I can't just tear up a legal warrant. You'll need to appear before Judge Fleming next week to address these charges properly." "She'll be there," Baxter assured him, "with legal representation." After the sheriff departed, Katherine sagged against Baxter in relief. "1 week," she murmured. "What do we do now?" Baxter's expression was determined. "Now we gather evidence and witnesses. If Blackwell wants a legal battle, we'll give him one." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Baxter sent riders to Denver to investigate Katherine's former employers and locate possible witnesses to her treatment. He consulted law books long gathering dust on his shelves, preparing arguments for the hearing. Katherine, meanwhile, wrote out a detailed account of her experiences since arriving in America, including names, dates, and locations that could be verified. Her hand trembled as she described the humiliations and abuses she had suffered, but she forced herself to be thorough and precise. 4 days before the hearing, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ryder's Rest. Katherine was in the garden with Martha when the sound of an approaching carriage drew their attention. A well-dressed gentleman in his 60s stepped down, assisted by a younger man who bore enough resemblance to be his son. Baxter emerged from the barn to greet them, his expression cautious but not hostile. "Judge Fleming," he said, extending his hand. "This is an unexpected honor." "Baxter Ryder," the older man replied, his handshake firm. "It's been too long. I believe you know my son, Andrew, of course. Welcome to you both." The judge cast an appraising glance around the property. "You've done well for yourself out here. Your father would be proud." "Thank you, sir." "May I ask what brings you all the way from town?" Fleming's shrewd eyes fixed on Katherine. "I believe that would be the young lady there. Miss O'Sullivan, I presume." Katherine stepped forward, wiping her soil-stained hands on her apron. "Yes, Your Honor." "I've come about the charges against you," Fleming said bluntly. "Normally, I don't make house calls before hearings, but this case has certain irregular aspects that concern me." Baxter invited the visitors inside, where Martha quickly served refreshments. Once they were settled in the parlor, Fleming came straight to the point. "2 days ago, Thaddeus Blackwell visited my chambers, offering a substantial donation to the town's new schoolhouse fund if I would ensure certain legal matters were resolved in his favor." The judge's expression was thunderous. "I've been on the bench for 30 years, and no one has ever so blatantly attempted to bribe me." Baxter leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I threw him out of my office and told him if he ever tried to compromise my court again, I'd have him in jail for contempt faster than he could spit." Fleming sipped his lemonade. "Then I decided to look more closely at this case involving Miss O'Sullivan." Katherine held her breath as the judge turned to her. "Young lady, I've reviewed the charges against you, as well as the indenture contract Mr. Ryder submitted. I've also taken the liberty of wiring the authorities in Denver for verification of certain facts." He set down his glass. "The family accusing you has a history of similar complaints against female servants who mysteriously steal valuables and then flee. None of the previous cases resulted in recovered property." "Because there was nothing to recover," Katherine said. "They fabricate the thefts as an excuse to avoid paying wages," Fleming nodded. "So I suspected. Furthermore, my son Andrew here recently returned from law school in Boston, where he's been researching legal precedents regarding indenture contracts." He gestured to the younger man. Andrew Fleming cleared his throat. "The Supreme Court ruling in Thompson v. Gray established that indenture contracts cannot be transferred without the consent of all parties, and that disputed contracts fall under civil, not criminal jurisdiction." "What does that mean for Katherine?" Baxter asked. The judge smiled for the first time. "It means, Mr. Ryder, that I am prepared to dismiss all criminal charges against Miss O'Sullivan at tomorrow's hearing. The alleged theft and assault will be reclassified as a civil dispute regarding the terms of her indenture, which appears to have been illegally transferred and is therefore void." Katherine pressed a hand to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me, Miss O'Sullivan. Thank the Constitution and the rule of law." Fleming's smile faded. "However, I should warn you both that Blackwell is not likely to take this defeat gracefully. He has considerable influence in these parts, not all of it legitimate." "We'll be ready for him," Baxter said grimly. As predicted, Blackwell's reaction to the dismissal of charges was swift and violent. The very evening after the hearing, as Baxter and Katherine were returning to the ranch, shots rang out from the trees alongside the road. Only Baxter's quick reflexes, pulling Katherine down in the wagon as he whipped the horses to a gallop, prevented tragedy. "This has to end," Katherine declared once they were safely behind the ranch's walls. "I can't live with the knowledge that he might hurt you because of me." "He won't stop until he gets what he wants," Baxter agreed, examining a bullet hole in his hat. "Or until he's stopped permanently." "What are you saying?" Katherine asked, alarmed by the cold determination in his voice. "I'm saying it's time to take the fight to Blackwell instead of waiting for his next move." Baxter paced the parlor, his expression grim. "He thinks he's untouchable because of his money and connections. We need to prove him wrong." The next morning, Baxter rode into town alone despite Katherine's protests. He returned late in the afternoon, his expression inscrutable. "What did you do?" Katherine demanded. "Planted some seeds," he replied cryptically. "Now we wait to see what grows." They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, A telegram arrived from Denver. Evidence secured stop Blackwell wanted for fraud and murder in Colorado. Stop federal marshals en route. Stop maintain vigilance. Stop murder, Katherine whispered, reading over Baxter's shoulder. I had a hunch, Baxter explained. Blackwell appeared in Redemption Springs about 5 years ago, already wealthy. Nobody knew where he came from or how he'd made his fortune. I wired some contacts in Denver, including a former Army comrade who's now a Pinkerton detective. Asked him to dig into Blackwell's past. And he found something, Baxter nodded. Apparently, Blackwell's real name is Theodore Black. He owned a mining company in Colorado that collapsed after a suspicious explosion killed 26 miners. Instead of facing investigation, he vanished with the company's assets, leaving his investors penniless and the miners' families without compensation. So the marshals will arrest him, Katherine asked hopefully. If they can find him, Blackwell's no fool, he'll have informants in town. If he gets wind of the investigation, he might run again. Baxter's prediction proved accurate. The next day, word reached them that Blackwell had disappeared from the Crimson Ace, taking his most loyal men and a substantial amount of cash. He's running, Baxter said grimly when Sheriff Haynes brought the news. But he won't get far. Every lawman in 3 territories will be looking for him now. For the first time since her arrival in Wyoming, Katherine felt truly free. The shadow of Blackwell's threats had lifted, the false charges against her dismissed. As spring gave way to the warmth of early summer, she blossomed like the wildflowers dotting the meadows around Ryder's Rest. Her relationship with Baxter deepened with each passing day. They rode together in the mornings, worked side by side during the day, and shared their dreams beneath the vast canopy of stars at night. Katherine discovered a talent for bookkeeping, taking over the ranch accounts with an efficiency that made Baxter wonder how he'd managed without her. One evening in late June, Baxter suggested a ride to their special meadow. The wildflowers were at their peak, painting the landscape in vibrant purples, yellows, and reds. As they spread a blanket among the blooms, Katherine sensed a nervous energy in Baxter that was unlike him. Is something wrong? She asked, reaching for his hand. Not wrong, he replied, squeezing her fingers. Just important. He took a deep breath. Katherine, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Before you came, I was just existing, not really living. You changed that. Katherine's heart began to race as Baxter reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. This was my mother's, he said softly. My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him. She gave it to me before she died, said I should save it for the woman who made my heart feel like home. He looked into Katherine's eyes. That's you, Katherine O'Sullivan. You're my home, my heart, my future if you'll have me. Tears of joy spilled down Katherine's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Oh, Baxter, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Katherine marveled at how far she had come from that terrifying day on the auction block. From captivity to freedom, from despair to hope, from isolation to love, all because one brave man had thrown down his hat and declared, "She's not for sale." They were married on a perfect September day, with Judge Fleming presiding and the entire ranch in attendance. Martha wept openly as Katherine walked toward Baxter in a gown of cream silk that the housekeeper had secretly ordered from Denver. The ranch hands cheered when Baxter swept his bride into a kiss that went on so long the judge had to clear his throat twice. As husband and wife rode back to Ryder's Rest, now officially O'Sullivan Ryder land by Baxter's insistence, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Ryder, Baxter said, his arm secure around her waist as they shared his saddle. I was just thinking about choices, she replied, leaning into his warmth. If I hadn't chosen to come to America, if you hadn't chosen to be in Redemption Springs that day, if you hadn't chosen to intervene. Some things are meant to be, Baxter said, pressing a kiss to her temple. I think we would have found each other somehow, someway. Katherine smiled up at the man who had become her protector, her partner, her love. I think you're right. In the years that followed, Ryder's Rest flourished under their joint stewardship. Baxter's knowledge of ranching combined with Katherine's head for business turned the modest property into one of the most successful operations in the territory. They added orchards and wheat fields, expanded the cattle herd, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality products. 2 years after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Bridget Martha, after Baxter's mother and their beloved housekeeper. A son, Michael James, followed 18 months later, and another daughter, Emily Rose, 2 years after that. As for Thaddeus Blackwell, he was eventually captured in Mexico and returned to Colorado to face justice for his crimes. The news barely caused a ripple in Katherine and Baxter's lives. So focused were they on their growing family and thriving ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Baxter surprised Katherine with a special gift, the deed to the land where the old auction block had stood in Redemption Springs. In its place now stood a school for the children of immigrants, funded jointly by the Ryders and Judge Fleming's family, where education was provided regardless of background or ability to pay. From darkness to light, Baxter said as they toured the completed building. From bondage to freedom. Katherine squeezed his hand, thinking of all the children who would find opportunity where she had once faced degradation. It's perfect. That night, as they lay in each other's arms in the bedroom they had shared for a decade, Katherine traced the scar on Baxter's side, the Confederate bullet that had nearly claimed his life all those years ago. "Sometimes I wonder if you were saving me or if I was saving you," she mused. Baxter chuckled, the sound rumbling beneath her ear. "Both, I reckon. You reminded me there were still things worth fighting for, worth living for. And you showed me that even in the darkest moments, someone can throw down a hat and change everything." As moonlight spilled through the window, painting silver patterns across their entwined forms, Katherine reflected that some auctions resulted not in bondage, but in the most precious freedom of all, the freedom to love and be loved in return. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of tomorrow across the land they had built together, a promise that had begun the moment a brave cowboy had declared a fiery-haired Irishwoman was not for sale.